small on the board. These come from Carl Jung, famous Swiss psychologist. I hold the view that the alchemist's hope of conjuring out of matter the philosophical gold, or the panacea, or the wonderful stone, was only in part an illusion, an effect of projection. For the rest, it corresponded to certain psychic facts that are of great importance in the psychology of the unconscious. As is shown by the texts and their symbolism, the alchemist projected what I have called the process of individuation into the phenomena of chemical change. Has anyone here ever been told that you were too emotional? Okay, excellent. All right. No? You need to self-regulate. It's a wild card. Okay, how about that you're way too in your head and you just need to stop overthinking things? Okay. Both? At the same time? So, if you have heard this, you may have been subject to the polarization of what are classically called the masculine and the feminine energies. Right? So, there's this thought. Have you heard this terrible word, hysterical? Right? It's a word that describes craziness, which comes from the root word for like the uterus, and like Hestia, the goddess of home and heart for the womb. Like, so it means, it's this facet of the English language that means women are crazy. Not cool. So usually on Sundays, I have this like, a new word, try this out, put it in your lexicon. If you don't know what lexicon means, I'll tell you it's one of my favorite. Today, here's a word to remove. Hysterical. Okay, it's a sexist term, isn't that weird? And good to know. And then just like erase that. So, but it hasn't always been bad, right? Polarity is not always bad, right? If you study like ballroom dance or something like that, like you kind of need somebody to adopt the lead and somebody to, what's the opposite of the lead? Follow. And somebody to follow. And we now know through the wonders of modern science that sometimes a woman can lead and a man can follow. It's amazing, but I've seen dances like that. Yeah.
Great follower.
See? Good deal. So polarity itself isn't bad, but sometimes we can use it as this, well, you're so emotional. Oh my God, you're just hysterical. Oh. Or on the men's side, right? Sometimes you're so closed off, you're so in your head, you're so goal-oriented. Why can't you just be in the moment, right? And we make these kind of like classifications that one style of being is right sometimes and one style is wrong. And then we also do this other weird thing, which is we associate that with a certain sex or gender, which is also, that's kind of arbitrary. So to ancient people, though, many of the wisdom cultures around the world, they recognize that there's some benefit in looking at, you could call it a divine polarity, right? So have you heard of this in some of you old Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance readers and peaceful warrior advocates and stuff like that? What are some of these divine polarities that you can recall from your interreligious studies? What do you think? Yeah, Dave? Yin and yang. Yeah, so yin and yang are the big ones. Are there others you can think of? Certainly it cannot just be the Chinese who thought of this, Allison.
Male and female incarnations in Buddha, right?
Right, so there are masculine and feminine bodhisattvas. This is not well known, or Buddhas, because it's in the secret Buddhism of the high Himalayan plateau. But there are female Buddhas and male Buddhas, and they like get together and have a happy time together and live in the universe and stuff. Francie, what do you think?
Animus and anima.
Yeah, animus and anima. So in the work of Jung, who drew on this old alchemical philosophy, in each of us, there is a masculine soul and a feminine soul, right? And he thought that for most men, and it seems to kind of work out this way for most, you can't like 100%ize, but for people aligned with their masculine, usually their job is to seek out the feminine side of their soul and reintegrate that. People who are aligned with their feminine, their job is to seek out the masculine side of the soul and reintegrate it. Okay, so yin-yang Buddhas of masculine and feminine iteration, anima and animus. Others? Can you think of any others? Yes?
Goddess and God?
The god and the goddess, right? So in our Wiccan traditions, they have this athame, the sacred knife, and super secret, it used to be, but they would do this symbolic element in the ritual where they would place the athame within the chalice, right, to symbolize the unity of this sort of directive, penetrating energy of life and this all-receptive, sort of holding energy of life. And they felt that somehow that unity, even just to have it represented symbolically without any explanation, had some kind of holistic effect on our inner life. In the Vedic system, sometimes this is called Shiva and Shakti. Have you heard of Shiva and Shakti for the yogis? Or if you're like really esoteric Indian stuff, Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is considered like the witnessing consciousness, and Prakriti is considered like all of the forms which it witnesses. And they align views in their philosophy with masculine and feminine elements. Okay, so that's cool. Over the last couple of months, we've been considering, so May, our theme was the mother. We sort of considered the mother archetype. And in June, our theme was the father, and we considered the father archetype. So you could certainly consider these in these sort of gendered terms. It works kind of well. We're a species with sexual dimorphism. So, for a large number of cultures, they go, oh, yeah, men are from Mars, and women are from Venus. That was a culture that came out on Oprah in 1997 or something with John Gray. And there's something to that because, a large percentage of people born in male bodies have this like intense amount of testosterone that goes through it, and it changes the way you think. It's just so if you know that, it can help you. You're like, why do I just want to kind of break stuff all the time as a teenager? You go, hey man, that's just Shiva alive in you. He's the cosmic destroyer, And estrogen and other hormones, like, I don't know as well from a personal side because apparently I'm in that 80% of men like testosterone driven, but it has a different effect. And so they classify that and say, no, honey, that's just Shakti alive in you. And then the nice thing about some ancient cultures, sort of pre-patriarchy cultures, is that they often also recognize the spectrum in between these polarities that most of us exist on this continuum, and we have other elements in it. But that's all to say that we don't even need to do this in sexually dimorphic terms. We can just talk about the great polarity of all that exists. So, what are they like? Well, to the Taoists, they have yin and yang. And let's see what it's got on here since I've got a slide about it. Yang is associated with brightness. Actually, I'm not going to read that. I like mine better. The yang energy is associated with expansion. And because it's associated with expansion, it also can be associated, like, in our own minds with this sense of, like, vast clarity, right? It's not so much associated with, like, the contents of consciousness, but with consciousness itself. It's associated with this daylight energy. It's associated with, like, directiveness, warmth. The yin energy, on the other hand, is darker, and it's more associated with solidity, with groundedness. So you can see where they ascribe this to kind of maternal principles. He goes out, he hunts, he looks across the field, she stays home, she nourishes the child. And they made that into yin and yang. It's very similar. You can think of it, if you've heard of this distinction between masculine psychology in terms of ranking and feminine psychology in terms of linking. The yin has a very linking, kind of joining element. The yang has a very kind of hierarchical way that it thinks about itself. To make things more personal, some of the ancient cultures thought of this in terms of Shiva and Shakti. So Shiva and Shakti come from Indian systems, Vedic systems, and Shiva really refers to, in its ultimate sense, divine consciousness, like just the capacity to be aware itself. Shakti, on the other hand, refers to the life force of the universe. So any dynamism, any energy, any sort of awesomeness that can come into our lives is associated with the Shakti principle. People who are more aligned with the Shiva principle, Shiva was considered mythologically to be the ultimate meditator. So he's the lord of all meditators. And what he likes best is to go for like 1,000 years at a time and sit on the highest mountain in the Himalayas in lotus pose and do nothing. Absolutely nothing. Ah. Is that anybody's vision of a great time? Yeah, that's some of us, right? Shakti, on the other hand, as the life force of the universe, is like she would be bummed that there was no good red wine and dark chocolate and dancing. There must be dancing, right? So she's a little more aligned with like the vitality of life. Family. What good is all your spirituality without family? Anybody more aligned with the Shakti current? Some Shaktis, right? So in each of us, we've got some of these Shiva energies, these yang energies. We've got some of these Shakti energies. We've got some rankers, and we've got some linkers. We've got folks like me who we just want things to be as simple and direct as possible. Anybody aligned with that one? As simple and direct as possible. And then on the other hand, that for some of us that can get really boring, right? Like, what about complexity? I mean, you could solve it all in a minute, but what if we poured a really good latte and then we just talked it out for about 2 hours? Anybody prefer complexity over just a simple and direct? Yeah. So and what's cool when we have this conversation is we're undoing the tendencies which are actually inculcated in us culturally to assume that the one we like or the one we've been indoctrinated in as correct is correct and the other one isn't correct. These are capacities that exist within each of us. We can all be linkers and we can all be rankers, and we can decide which one we like better, which one am I today, which one maybe do I want to be throughout my life. Okay, we kind of get it, the yin, the yang, the Shiva, the Shakti. Is it clear as mud? Right, because there's an assignment coming up, which is a short interpersonal contemplation. Here's your question. Just think about, as they've been presented so far, this aligned with simplicity, directness, clarity, or aligned with nurturance, growth, groundedness. Do you feel more like you're a Shiva or a Shakti? Are you a Shiva at work and a Shakti on the weekend? Where do these principles come alive in your own life? So, if you're willing to play my game, you're going to find a buddy. Here's the signal for I want to play the game. And the signal that you don't want to play the game, you're like, very Shiva today. Okay? So, when I say go, we're going to find a buddy, and then each person will have about a minute. Just, contemplate it together. Are you more Shiva? Are you Shakti? When are you which? How do these principles manifest in your life? Ready? Begin. So, what do you think? Did you come to any insight by sharing with your friend? What was an insight you found? It's age related. Tell me about this. Some people have found that. Yeah.
Younger years, it's
Masculine. Quote unquote.
younger years, confusion, chaos, kids, school, doing this, everything.
Uh-huh.
As you get older, levels out a little bit, you don't want all that.
Yeah, so you went from a Shakti full life into a Shiva hermit yogi
And the
life.
other is like recognizing that, for me personally, I'm very aware of my Shakti, and that's sort of where I've gone. But she was the person all the time.
Aha, and that's an interesting way. So in a minute, I'm going to talk about like, well, why do we care about this typology? Why should we be dividing the world up? But when we start to use this kind of terminology, it can actually help us to identify some of the processes that are within. Like, wait, I have been yearning for more simplicity or silence or alone time. When you can just go, oh, well, there's Shiva. It actually makes that process into something sacred, maybe, instead of just confusing. So, very cool.
I just got to keep them straight to.
Well, yeah. Yeah, they don't care what name you call them. Who else had an insight? Yes, sir?
Is there kind of an introvert-extrovert aspect to this? Because that's kind of how it's working in my brain
There
right now.
can be, but you can have an introvert that just loves their cat and paints. The painter, your Thomas Kincaid painter of light at home, and that would be more alignment with the Shakti energy. Versus you can have an extrovert that just loves to like stand in front and direct everybody with their vast clarity, which might be a little more issue. So, but sometimes they can fall into those. Yeah. I'm kind of presenting it that way. Good catch. What else? Yeah.
I'm working a lot on education, and what I was thinking about with Dory when we were talking about it was that when I am teaching in my teaching job, I have to be more aligned with Shiva because I have to understand there are many different learning types, how to present the material in a way that's clear to all of them.
Yeah, so
Bring
you
it
have to have that
together and not take too much time.
clarity.
Be efficient and clear. And when I'm doing my other job, doing weddings, and when I run the rehearsal, I'm Shiva. When I'm actually officiating the wedding, I'm Shakti.
Yeah.
So that's really, thank you for allowing me to notice that.
Cool, yeah, because when you're officiating, it's like energy and connection and beauty. But to get it all done, it has to be like clarity and direction and from point A to point B.
Yes, I'm confident.
Sharon, did you have one?
Well, this is a Jungian concept of the shadow side. And I once did this workshop a long time ago where I did dreams and I got in touch with the black men in my dream chasing me was my shadow side.
Yeah, cool.
It was pretty scary and
Yeah.
stuff.
Shadows, no joke.
So although I'm more on the feminine side, when I go into my crazy moments, I'm straight on the Shakti side.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it can go back and forth depending on my emotion, my mood.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a really good point. The unintegrated part of ourselves is often the opposite of what we generally identify with. So usually we'll have all of this material that comes out when we're off balance, and it's like just flipping the switch. All of a sudden, you were going with the flow and nurturing everyone, and it's like, okay, this has to be like this. You guys have to shut up and leave me alone. Okay, maybe that's just me. Low glimpse into when I'm having a bad day. Yeah. Is there one more? Anybody want to share just one more? Yeah.
We were both Shiva, so we're like, I'm Shiva, you're Shiva. Okay, we're done here.
All done. Yeah. Classic Shiva conversation.
Yeah. Time to like fill my water. I was thinking.
Perfect. See, that's efficient, right? So we can kind of get, when we talk it out, we can get a sense of how these things manifest, right? And sometimes we're more goal-oriented, sometimes we're more process-oriented, sometimes we're more conceptual, sometimes we're more intuitive, right? We have all of these access to all of these aspects, and some of us choose to align more with one or more with the other. But really cool to just kind of like think about it, to find where are all of these different pieces and parts. Okay, there was something cool in here. I just read that I wrote this was a genius. yeah, so has anybody ever done like a project that was really all consuming to you? Like you were dedicated, you had this project, I'm gonna finish the book, I'm gonna raise the money, I'm gonna, whatever. Has anybody ever gotten to have that experience? Okay, and did you notice perhaps that when you were doing the project, you could just eat the same rice and roni meal like for 3 days in a row, and you just don't really even care because you got to get back to the project, right? And this is kind of like I have this image of like the 1950s dad or something like that, who's like, well, what do you like to eat? He's like, well, what my wife cooks me. You know, it's just like you come home from work and you're doing the thing, and then somebody puts something down in front of you, and you just eat it, and then you go back to like making the world go round because you've been taught you're supposed to be the Yang principle that drives everything, and so you just drive everything. Right? And then have there been other times, maybe you finished that project and it's summer vacation. I'm kind of in summer vacation mode right at the moment, and like all you can do is just eat chocolate and popcorn, like be in the woods or something. Have you ever had this experience? Like if you don't go to the mountains or somewhere like just vibrant with life force, part of your soul might perish. Yeah. So these two are kind of these Shiva and Shakti energies that come alive us at different times. So now what I wonder is, it's fun. It's fun to play with these. And I imagine if you have a spouse or a best friend or something like that, you can start to be like, hey, oh wow, you're really Shiva right now. Oh, hey, I'm really Shakti today. And it's kind of cute. But then what happens if you're trying to have a conversation or work something out and someone is aligned with very strongly with one pole, and the other person is aligned very strongly with the other pole? Have you ever had this happen? Right? So you might get like what the question I asked at the beginning. You come home, it was a long day, you're kind of in your shock to all the energies of the world, the energies of me as emotion, and it's all very complex, and I wish I could share that with someone. And you tell your good friend, and they say, God, you're so emotional. What's overwhelming about that? Isn't it just clear? Just step 1, step 2, step 3, and your problem is solved. Or, on the other hand, maybe you honestly just need some cognitive distance from something for a minute, right? If you dive back into the whole Freudian mother wound something or other, you're never going to get the clarity that you need. You're just like, let me just think about this for a minute. And your doggone best friend says, quit avoiding the issue. Why do you have to always just conceptualize everything and like hide your heart from the world? Because they are making wrong your particular typology. Now certainly, we can be emotionally labile. I did it yesterday. And we can also be aloof, emotive deniers. These are definitely things that we can be. But there are also moments where we're authentically expressing a specific type for our benefit, for the benefit of another. And that type gets demonized by someone who's stuck in the opposite type. You can see this, I call it the punishment versus nourishment paradigm. So if you have ever heard maybe a liberal versus conservative argument on the justice system, for example. Now, there are a number of different stages that can be in play, but let's say you have two very integrated, kind people, one who's right of center and one who's left of center. And what you will likely see is that the person who's left of center probably believes that the problem is people aren't getting enough education, aren't getting enough nourishment, there aren't enough gardens there. And if we just build these things, then the problem will solve itself. And the person who's right of center will probably think, you can't just throw away all the protections that we have for society. You know, if you just let people run rampant and run wild without any discipline, without any control and direction, you're going to have chaos on your hands. And to me, maybe you're more liberal or more conservative, but I like both of these perspectives. I think if you grow a bunch of gardens and then you have reasonable protective use of force, you get a pretty good society. It's been tried out. But if you get people who are really locked in a nourishment paradigm or a correction paradigm, they can fight for hours and hours and hours on this and never come to an agreement. And it's because they're aligning once in nourish everybody and grow it. What? I prefer an all-embracing stance. why do you have to divide people? You know they're hurting. And the other one's, well, you're just going to allow for whatever kind of behavior, all miscreants running on the streets in anarchy. And it's very hard to talk to each other if you're identified exclusively with one type. Okay, so typology is valuable. Would you agree or disagree? Typology can be valuable. Learning typology can be valuable. It can be kind of fun, right? I find that these create something of magic words, that when we have them in our mind, we can look at things that are happening that didn't have a name before, and we can put a name on it, and then all of a sudden, understanding blossoms in us, where before we were just kind of left adrift in a sea of samsara, just things that wash us around in confusion all day. For example, this book that Lynn recommended, You Just Don't Understand, is that the one?
Never Stand Up.
Yeah, is that right?
Limited conversation.
Yeah, I think it's called You Just Don't Understand, right? And so one of the things that she proposes is that men, and I would say in this, anyone aligned with this masculine principle, classically archetypal masculine principle, tend to think of things in terms of ranking. We've heard this through a lot of research. And people aligned with the feminine principle tend to think of things in terms of linking. So how she proposed this is that an ordinary sort of innocuous conversation, when you bring it to someone aligned with their masculine, they'll immediately think of how this reflects on their status and who's trying to one-up whom. Whereas someone aligned with their feminine may just think that we're having a nice conversation. So I read this book, and then I started to see it happening. Like, people would come to talk about their emotions, and my mind would go, wait, are they saying that they think their emotions are better than mine? Are they telling me that I can't possibly understand what they're feeling? And none of that was happening. But I could look at my mind and be like, why are you being such a man right now? What if you just chilled? And it was amazingly freeing to know that I didn't have to believe that. And it also didn't mean there was something wrong with me. That's just how the size of my corpus callosum, smaller than most women's, it's not thinking about linking, it's thinking about ranking. Like 23 hours a day. Sorry. So typology can be magical, but it only goes so far. These things that you cannot see, but I needed to have a slide in there to prove that they were real, are the staged ethical development put forward by Kohlberg and Gilligan. If you've heard of Kohlberg and Gilligan, once upon a time, Kohlberg did this work where he interviewed a bunch of men, and then he had these questions about ethical development. And he found that men tend to go through a pre-conventional level where what's ethical is whatever I can get away with. A conventional level where what's ethical is what society, you've internalized society's rules. And then a post-conventional level where you have an inner sense of what's right that sort of comes out of your own heart. And he put this in terms of like justice. So men, according to Kohlberg's research, in general, grow from this pre-conventional sense of justice to a universal sense of justice, like declaration. He found that they go through he found, let's put the emphasis on there, he found that they go through a similar development, but their development was inferior. Because he was looking at it through the lens of masculine ethical development. So Carol Gilligan said, what if we did this and actually interviewed women as their own baseline, instead of comparing and saying one's inferior, one blah, 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 blah. And so what she found is there's a similar developmental trajectory that goes from pre-conventional to post-conventional, right? Whatever I can get away with, whatever society tells me, to my heart has a sense. But instead of universal rights, they develop toward universal care. Right? So just in the verbiage, and again, it's not, for everybody's going to be that way. But in general, this feminine side of ourselves, as it develops, wants care and nurturance distributed completely equally, universally to everyone. The masculine side of ourselves, as it develops, wants rights and justice, freedom, distributed equally to everyone. And it's kind of cool. And so this second point in this sermon is typology is great, but we can't confuse types for stages. We can't confuse types for stages. This is what the big patriarchal insult has been for 2,000 to 5,000 years, that things that are aligned with the feminine are inferior. Same thing Colbert figured out. It's as if he was swimming in that cultural indoctrination. Instead of saying things that are aligned with the feminine are inferior, you can say, that's a different typology. And it goes through stage development, just like everything else, right? Then, we could also do the opposite. We could go, well, if the patriarchy did that, then things that are aligned with the masculine must be inferior. What if we had all linking and no ranking, all linking, no ranking? And we're making the same mistake, is we're upholding feminine values, whether they're pre-conventional, conventional, or post-conventional, because they're feminine, they must be better. Right? So if we can distinguish between types and stages, we have a real way to start to get in touch with these energies in myself. So now, we're not going to do an interpersonal contemplation on this, but you can think about this at home. Where in my Shivas and my Shaktis am I manifesting a pre-conventional Shiva, yang energy? Where am I manifesting a post-conventional Shakti, yin energy? Right? How much am I willing to disregard the needs of others in order to get my silence and my directness and my simplicity? Or when am I willing to embrace the needs of others in order to make sure that care is distributed universally? And we might find that the masculine so-called and the feminine so-called energies in us have different levels of development. They have different levels of development. Okay. Union. In the ancient Greek myth, you've probably heard this one. Once upon a time, there were no boys and girls. There were just souls, who actually were like two souls in one, like androgyne beings. And in the Greek myth, they split these souls, and one polarity person was over here, the other polarity person was over here. And I don't remember if this is a pre-modern gendered myth or a non-gendered myth, but let's just say your reciprocal energy is out there somewhere, and they're looking for you, and you're looking for them, right? It's a cute myth about why we feel so incomplete, right? They said you were complete once, and then you got split apart, and you're like that Shel Silverstein story, right? I'm looking for my missing piece, I'm looking for my missing piece. In alchemy, a very similar thing is possible. I'm really a fan of the work of Carl Jung. I'm not so sure that his therapy is all that effective as a therapy, just looking at evidence-based therapies. It's a cognitive behavioral seems to like win all the races on statistical analyses. But in terms of interpreting mythology, in terms of like juicy life skills or stuff to study, like Carl Jung and then Joseph Campbell, where he took that work, like have some really cool things to say. One thing that Carl Jung said, Hyros Gamos, the sacred or spiritual marriage, union of archetypal figures in the rebirth mysteries, like those of Demeter, of antiquity, and also in alchemy. Typical examples are the representation of Christ and the church as bridegroom and bride, and the alchemical conjunction of the sun and the moon. So the last idea I want to present to you is that if we are stuck identifying with one of these poles, with nurturance or directivity, with universal rights or universal care, we're a little bit, not exactly an incomplete being, but let's say you're not bringing your best self to the game. What is the game? Well, all of that stuff that you see going wrong in the world. For me right now, at this time in our world and in our country, it seems like everything's been sped up. I don't know if it feels that way for you, but I've had a real hard time kind of writing sermons lately. I used to be able to say, like, well, the yogis thought this. Isn't that neat? And here's a Sanskrit word. And now every time I'm like, okay, how is this going to stave off the apocalypse? I can no longer give like cute sermons on philosophy in my mind because it feels a little apocalyptic out there. When mommy and daddy are fighting, not a lot gets done. We don't have like the full unified team that we need to really make sure that those who need nourishment and direction are getting the nourishment and direction they need. The mommy and daddy that are most important are not the ones that exist outside, but the ones that exist inside. So in Hatha Yoga, okay, we'll give you some Sanskrit yoga words from ancient times. Have you heard of this Hatha Yoga? Has anyone been to a Hatha Yoga class? One or one? Try. Hatha literally means ha means sun and ha means moon. Yoga means union. It means the union of the sun and moon. And what they're trying to do with all those poses, it's really interesting. Usually they say this right half of you is masculine, this left half of you is feminine. And they say when you stretch this way, you're going to loosen up all of the immature masculine energy inside of you. And when you stretch this way, you're going to loosen up all of the immature feminine energy. Interesting philosophy. You can go try it. And somehow in this yogic practice, after you do this, you sit down and meditate. And they metaphorically say these energies, like on that image of the caduceus, these energies are going to twine and fuse into something balanced. So imagine, if you will, being able to have access, kind of anytime you needed it, to the capacity to get very clear and to discern from your vast, open, still consciousness what the right thing to do, the best course of action, the most efficient way to go about things would be. And you're not stuck with that because you also have the capacity in a moment to drop into your heart and feel as if the hearts of the beings around you are part of you. You have this universal care. You can feel the room like there's energy in the word room. What does it need in order to lighten it up and make it sweeter and more bountiful and more beautiful? You have access to corrective impulses and nurturing impulses in equal measure. So what the yogis put forward is, they said, like, imagine a person like that. Like, how cool might such a person be? What type of work might they be able to do in this world? As an alchemist, I believe the other great dichotomy they present to be resolved is that you have a microcosm, a little universe within, and then there's a macrocosm, the large universe without. The alchemists propose that there's no separation between microcosmos and macrocosmos. What happens within reflects into what's happening without. They propose that if you were to integrate these, you would be like an ambassador of the balance between these energies. How do we do it? I hope my pep talk has inspired you that it's the best thing we can do for the world, and you got to get out there and be integrated, and wow, the stakes are high, and alchemy and the ancients did it, and it's really neat. How, Reverend Fauju? Tell me how. Yeah, right? Maturation. So the process of maturation is very interesting, at least on this sort of emotional level. What maturation means is that for each operating system of consciousness, when it stops working, has life ever thrown you a curveball? I'm not the only one. Okay. Or a speedball. Life's secret spitball. And for every one of those that you get, it forces you to reevaluate the tools with which you are coming at the world. Right? Have you ever had this moment? Life threw you a curveball, and then like for 3 months, in my case, it usually takes at least 3 months. You're saying, I don't see that coming. What could I have done differently? And when this happens, something really interesting happens. It mirrors the work of Piaget. You have to start to learn to adopt different perspectives than the ones you've been locked in thus far. Right? Because you realize if life can throw you these curveballs, you must not know all the answers. This perspective that I think of as me is incomplete. And you're forced to grow into a more pluralistic and embracing stance. The neat thing that we find is that in the lower levels of development, masculine and feminine energies are impossible to get to match each other. When you reach the higher levels of development toward this universal justice, universal care, it's almost impossible to keep these energies from coming together. And the promise of these ancient alchemists and ancient yogis is not that you're going to come together and become some sort of washed out non-polar blob. But, I mean, look at this guy. That's sexy. That's not, you're going to be like this radiant, like dancing in the universe, but I'm also completely pure consciousness. And what I think they were pointing to in metaphor is that you become a being who has vast power to influence the lives of those around them for the better. I'll close with a short quote from a man who wrote about the life of Carl Jung. He says about alchemy, the outcome, if successful in both alchemy and individuation, is a union of opposites, the conjunctionis of the transcendent function, leading to alchemical gold, the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, or in Jungian terms, the self. So let's contemplate as we go about this week, where exactly is my inner Shiva? Where exactly is my inner Shakti? How mature are they? Where am I stuck? And as we start to purify these things, we change the microcosmos within, which will allow us to see change in the macrocosmos without. With that, let's sing a song about that, which is number
134.
134.